In this lesson, we're going to begin building up the sprite animation script. Alright, so in the last lesson we finished up our player movement, and I'm pretty happy with the way that's turning out. And now what we want to do is we want to get the sprite mesh to actually show the car sprite and animate that onto the sprite mesh. So to get started with this, let's create a new script, and we're going to right click and create C# script. Let's call this sprite animation. Now a sprite animation script can be a little challenging, especially if we have some high expectations out of the script. For example, for this script, what I want is I want to be able to have looping animations, and I also want to have one-off animations. So that's going to create a couple of challenges. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take this a little bit at a time. We're just going to gradually build it up until we get exactly what we want out of this script. And we're going to be doing this kind of on a rough type of basis. So the script might get a little long, but it should be fairly light. So to get started with this, let's create our first variables. So with the sprite sheet, we have an image. So it's a single image, and it's got sprites that go across and down. Now on the sprite sheet we have what's called rows and columns. So what I want to be able to do is I want to take the sprite sheet and I want to scale it down or scale it up to display a single frame on my sprite sheet, or a single sprite on the sprite sheet. So to get started with this, let's create a public variable, and we're going to use int as its type, an integer, and we're going to say columns, and we're going to set this equal to 8. Now we have 8 sprites on our sprite sheet, so 8 across, and then we also have 8 down. So what we want to do is we want to create another variable called int rows, and we're going to set this equal to 8 as well. Now we want these variables to be exposed, because if the designer has a different type of sprite sheet later on, they can adjust this value, okay, and it will adjust the sprite sheet. So we have these two variables. Now what do we want to do with these variables? Well, I'm going to go to my update function, and the first thing that I want to do is I want to get my frame size. I don't want to see the entire sprite sheet right off the bat. So let's go ahead and create a variable called vector2, which is its type, and the variable name is called frame size. We're going to set this equal to a new vector2, and we're going to give it a value. So you can see here that it needs a float x and a float y. So it's looking for its x and y direction. So in order to get a single frame of our sprite sheet, we need to take the sprite sheet size, which is going to be 1.0, and we need to divide that by how many frames we have, or how many sprites we have across. So it's 1 divided by 8. Now this should seem familiar. If you'll remember, we had adjusted the material earlier, and we had divided it by 8, and we got 0.125. So that's essentially what we're going to be getting in code here. So let's say 1.0f divided by columns, and then we're going to do comma and get our float y. So 1.0f divided by rows, and then semicolon. Now we have our value called frame size, but we haven't done anything with it yet. So what we want to do is we want to access the material of the object. So we're going to say renderer.material.setTextureScale. Now this is a function that is under material, and what this will do is it will adjust the texture's tiling based on 2 values. Okay, so the first value is going to be a string, and a string is represented in quotations, so we need to give it a name. So what texture are we wanting to access? Well, on every material there's a texture slot called main text. So underscore main text, and then we're going to say comma, and then we're going to get the vector2 scale value. Now we just created a vector2 called frame size, so let's put that in. We're going to end with parentheses and then end with a semicolon. Let's save this and see what we get. Let's go into Unity, and if we hit play, you'll notice that nothing's happened. Why? Hopefully you've caught this. If you select the PFB player car, you need to assign the sprite animation script. Now, before you assign it, there's one thing that we need to remember. The script is trying to access the material of the component or of the object that this script is going to be on. So take a look at your game object and your components. Is there material on this? No. Let's go down to the player mesh, and here we can see the material. So let's add the component here. So scripts and sprite animation. Now we can see that there. And now if we hit play, you'll see that it has scaled that out to a single frame. Now we're starting to see this again. Last time, when we started creating the materials for the tracks, we adjusted the tiling to 0.125 on the X and Y, and we got this exact same thing. But we don't want the cloud. Okay, we don't want that dust particle. What we want is the actual car. So what we need to adjust now is going to be the offset. So let's go ahead and do that now. So adjusting the offset is going to be kind of the same thing. So I'm going to go up underneath this. I'm going to say vector 2. And this time I'm going to say frame offset. And we're going to set that equal to a new vector 2. And this value is going to be 1.0f. We're going to divide that by columns. And then we're going to do 1.0f and divide that by rows. Okay, so here we're going to see the frame offset, and it's going to give us the value of 0.125 and 0.125 in the X and the Y. Let's go ahead and add in our line of code to physically apply that to the material. So we're going to do renderer.material.set texture offset, and then we need to give it the string name for the value or the property that we want to adjust. So it's going to be main text, end quotations, comma, and then frame offset. Close parentheses and end with semicolon. Now if I hit save on this and go into Unity and we hit play, notice that we're getting a different texture altogether. The offset has been changed, so we're on the right track. Now with this, I don't want to have to set this value. I could do that with a regular material. Now the other thing that we need to add on top of this is we want to animate this offset to create the illusion of animation. So what I need to do is I need to create some variables that are going to change my offset every single second and base that off of frames per second to create the illusion of animation. So what we're going to do in our next lesson is we're going to set up a simple system that's going to be based on time, and we are going to adjust that offset based on time. So I'll see you then.